Okay, so we are in the peak of the Great Depression, 1932. Hoover's really messed everything up. In steps Franklin Roosevelt, who had ran an election promising to use the federal government's power to help people, not just to prop up businesses, which is what Hoover had tried to do, but to try to directly impact people's lives. He wasn't afraid of the name calling of socialism. In fact, what he promised was bold experimentation. Now, we never get as far as socialism. That's often a critique used against Roosevelt and his liberal agenda. But what he does is use the federal government to provide relief, recovery, and reform, which are going to move the United States away from laissez-faire capitalism. So if you think of this as a spectrum, like communism over here and laissez-faire government over here, he's moving us from laissez-faire more towards the middle. So we have these ideas of relief, recovery, and reform. Providing relief is these direct ways of impacting people's lives. Recovery means getting the economy going in the correct direction again. And then reform is changing the system so it doesn't break this badly again. Now, oftentimes you'll hear Roosevelt's New Deal called the first 100 days. A lot of what he proposes actually gets accomplished in the first 100 days. And overall, his program is going to be referred to as the New Deal. Now, he's going to be elected several times, but in his first two elections, we're in the middle of the Great Depression. His first election, he promises a New Deal. We call it the first New Deal. So in his first New Deal, the first thing he does is pass legislation to try to solve the banking crisis. The crisis that the banks had was they didn't have enough money. And what was happening a lot were these things called bank runs, where if people thought that the bank was going to run out of money, they would run to the bank and take it out, because literally if the bank failed, they lost all of their money. There was no protection for them. So the first thing that Roosevelt does is try to pause the panic by creating a 4-day bank holiday where all the banks in the United States just closed their doors. And then he said investigators, they closed down bad banks and so forth. Then they created something called the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The FDIC was designed to protect people's savings if the bank failed. That way, I think it was at the time up to $25,000. If you had less than $25,000 in the bank, the government would give you that money back if the bank failed. That was designed to prevent bank runs because they tended to be self-fulfilling prophecies. If you thought the bank was going to fail, you would run to the bank and make sure the bank failed. So if they could keep people from running to the bank, that would keep those banks open. And bank closures almost disappeared by 1934. Another thing they did was try to separate regular banks from investment banks and something called the Glass-Steagall Act. That way, the banks couldn't take people's savings accounts and invest them in the stock market and speculate and then lose all that money and then close. So they're trying to regulate the system a little bit more. They also create something called the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. Again, trying to regulate Wall Street to make sure that they don't have those big failures that lead to another crash. Roosevelt's going to promote all of this through what he referred to as a fireside chat. The vast majority of the country is going to have radios by 1935 or so. So what ends up happening is Roosevelt would go on the radio and announce his plans, and it felt like kind of having a chat with the president. He's not using an intermediary. He's talking directly to the people using this new technology. It's kind of like, let's say, Twitter for his era.